everybody. My name is Esther Groen. I'm head of payment consultancy at Oijen Solutions. And I'm here with my colleague Arjeh van Oijen, head of product management at Oijen. And we want to talk today about our experience and our findings on Sibos. And Arjeh, you've been at Sibos several times. So I think it's very nice that you open and share a little bit of what your experience was of Sibos this year, as opposed to the other ones.
Yes, thank you, Esther. Absolutely. It was since London 3 years ago that there was a Sibos again in a face-to-face setting. And what you could notice with everyone that everyone was glad to meet each other again. It's a community, of course, where people coming together at Sibos to do business, but also people started to know each other over time. So personal relationships have been built. And what you noticed that everyone was very glad to meet each other again. So there were about 9,000 people again. In this case, it was in Amsterdam. And yeah, there were a couple of interesting themes. I think that, of course, ISO 222 remains a top topic because it's an important development industry, and that is something that will continue also for the coming years. I don't expect it will be the last Cyber that ISO 222 and the migration to it will be an important subject. But also were some other interesting areas that were addressed. One of them is that I think you can conclude that real time becomes the new normal. And all over the world, new real-time payment schemes and infrastructures are being set up. And that, of course, has a huge impact on the banks that need to transform into that new world. Which also creates a lot of new commercial opportunities. So that is very exciting. Another area is, of course, the whole area about outsourcing and rationalization, SaaS, payment processing as a service, BaaS, whatever kind of terminology is used. That was an important theme. And maybe fourth is central bank digital currency, where 3 years ago, still digital currencies was a lot of people were still confusing it with cryptocurrencies. Now you see after 3 years that there have been a lot of new initiatives in various parts of the world where now also they start seeing the real business cases, both from an interbank settlement perspective as well as from a retail payments perspective. So a lot of interesting areas.
Yeah, I find especially the last one. I'm not sure whether you saw the panel discussion with, amongst others, Evelien Whitlock. She's the program manager of the Digital Euro, particularly on this topic, where interoperability indeed was like the main theme. So how do we organize that? But it's over 100 central banks across the globe are working on central bank digital currencies. So they're very much indeed on the technological side, on the policy side. That's kind of emerging. But to me, I think the use cases in that sense are a little bit still unclear, but it's definitely something that everybody's starting to get their heads around. So for me, indeed, the whole metaverse, digital markets, digital value and assets and everything that comes with that in the exchange and storing was a big theme at Sibos. I think another big theme, Arjeh, and I'm not sure what was the whole ESG topic. For me, it was like almost everywhere, whether it's sustainable finance, whether it's inclusive finance, or everything that comes with that in organizing it and translating that into KPIs. Lots of talk around that topic. And I particularly really like the opening speech of André Kuipers, which is our Dutch space astronaut, explaining the value of being sustainable in so many ways. And he compared the Earth to a spaceship with limited resources, but particularly focused on the value of just constantly innovating, using new technology, finding new use cases and appliances to it. That really helps us progress. And I think that was a nice analogy he had to the financial ecosystem where we're in. And definitely, last but not least, what you're already addressing is the whole payment technology progress. So what does that really mean? So that might be an interesting one to deep dive a little bit further on, because that's our business, right? We're in the business of payment technology.
Yeah.
What are the key challenges that we particularly see that banks are facing at the moment when it comes to these types of business?
Yeah. So what you see in the market, of course, in the payments market, competition is increasing. There are new smaller banks, newcomers, new banks that are entering the market with new innovative offerings, also focus on specific target customers, but also fintech companies, and that then they're becoming real serious alternatives for the traditional banks. At the same time, you see the challenge for a lot of those banks is that a lot is happening in the area where it's more about complying, staying compliant. Changes in the infrastructures, like the move to real time, the move to ISO 222, but also in the sanction screening and AML space, banks, payment processors in general, need to invest huge amount of money and effort and also attention, which makes that they can't use that for innovating. And I think that is one of the key challenges. So I think also banks need to start looking at how they could rationalize, so that I expect that certain categories of banks will start outsourcing their payments processing to external parties, which again could be other banks, so that with that they create more resources, they free up resources, but also budget and attention to focus on the innovation of the payment services, so that they can face better those challenges that are coming up through newcomers in the market.
Yeah, and I think particularly on that point, because at Sibos, we launched the research that that Celent has been doing for us on payment processes. And indeed, 86% of banks find margins on payment challenging to maintain, which is, compared to last year, 2021, up from 59%. So that's a huge increase. So at one point, indeed, banks they have this capability. It's very much considered as a cost center, not considered as a business yet. On the other hand, we see tier 2, tier 3 banks, or maybe other organizations, more in the e-commerce space, that want to start providing these types of payment processing capabilities from an embedded finance perspective, for instance. But it's really too difficult and too challenging and too costly to do this in the right way, and indeed takes away their focus from the things that they really want to focus on, which is building the right propositions for their customers. And you see fintech really stepping into that space, but banks are still a bit reluctant. So I think that's a challenge where they really need to start getting their heads around how they can start to make that switch. Sorry.
Like you said, banks, the larger banks have those capabilities.
Yeah.
I think the challenge they are facing is to make those services accessible to other players in the market, the smaller banks, in such a way that it becomes as easy and seamless as possible, based on API technology, to make use of the service of those large banks, which is at the moment not yet the case. So I think that's if a bank is capable of putting such a service that is seamless, that is easy to access in place, I think there's a huge potential for them to leverage their existing capabilities by insourcing then payments processing from other banks, and with that generating new revenue.
Yeah.
And create cost benefits by volume skills.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's definitely a space where, for instance, Banking Circle, and that was a panel that I chaired during Sibos on the value of collaboration through these types of partnerships, where banks can scale and grow their proposition and keep their corporate customers who go cross-border, because the world is globalizing, right? It's becoming borderless when it comes to e-commerce and doing business. Without losing them to potential other competitors. And I'm not sure whether you've seen the interview with Anne Boden, the CEO founder of Starling Bank. She's also selling her engine to different to other banks across the globe, and they have a completely up-to-date, future-proof tech stack. So I think that's where that's where banks need to start moving towards to. I think this is where that's the sweet spot also for ICANN. But what I also noticed, and I think that's really good news, is that because of open banking and because of PSD2, the whole concept of opening up and API first type of business models have really kind of been embraced by most of the banks. So they're now really aware of what they need to do, also bottom up from an architecture, a technology point of view, to indeed make that type of services available, accessible, and really start delivering the value over that.
Exactly, and it also means that banks need to have a new type of application, payment application. Not anymore black boxed, where you have a huge amount of functionality, but you're not able to bring in your own specific functionalities, but an application that offers a lot of functionality out of the box, where you have the flexibility to include your own specific functionality and services, where you can differentiate in the market without being dependent on a vendor. So what we notice is that, and that's also, we noticed in a lot of the conversations we had at Sibos, that banks are looking for solutions that are more flexible, or provide a more open architecture, so that they can have more control on the functionality they can incorporate in that solution without being dependent on a vendor. And I think that's this is going to also become an important theme, I think, in the future of payments, and also I expect at Sibos.
Yeah, and I think this is where particularly our greenhouse strategy and IPF solution taps into, because and you were involved in a lot of these meetings as well. Is that we've seen lots of banks particularly focusing on this point. How can I become more in control? How can I get the best of both worlds, the buy and the build version? Become more resilient to change, flexible, and basically what we call greenhouse strategy, grow my own business in the way I want to grow it, at a time that is relevant, at a time where I have the right partners or I have the right customers in place. So maybe interesting to maybe high over reflect without naming names, of course. What was the general feedback or response that we got from the banks that we've talked to at our booth around this topic, Arjeh?
Yeah, like I mentioned, the possibility to, on one end, they want to have as much as functionality that they can have, because they don't need to build it themselves, because there are, of course, banks in in the market or in that decided to build their own payment platform from scratch. But that takes many years before you have reached a state that you can start really implementing this. So what we see that banks want to have a solution or looking for solutions that deliver a lot of functionality out of the box that is proven, also from a scalability and resilience perspective, but where they have the flexibility to build on their own functionality where it's applicable. And that also resulted that we had a lot of conversations with banks we have never had any contact with. So, and I think that's an interesting element of an event like Sibos, that you come across because so many banks across the globe that you normally will not that easily get in contact with because they are not in your region or whatever. So I think that was one of the key takeaways from the conversations I had at Sibos. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I even understood that one of the feedback, and I was in that meeting of one of the banks that we spoke to, was this. This is like a dream. Like this is too good to be true. If I'd known this before then, but then still, we can move and support in that area. So I think also our tagline, "Pay tech for grown-ups," really kind of stresses that we want to talk to people who understand the value of having a proper payment technology strategy in place and how to best execute on that. Exactly addressing the points that you've just mentioned. And so I think the opportunities that I think that we particularly see are in this area, right? Go back to your technology stack, take a look from what exactly do we want to achieve with payments, also on a data monetization space. So I thought that was also something that we had quite a lot of interviews and talks about, not only from a fraud and fin crime prevention point of view, but really also from an ESG point of view. How can I help, for instance, my customer plan their business better or their finances better? So more in the personal finance space, but also how can I leverage my capabilities and the data that I have to help, for instance, SME banks better. So I think that was also an area where we see more and more banks moving, and where, hey, the way you manage your data and make it available and the quality that you strive for are becoming more and more important.
Absolutely. And what you see is that banks are sitting on a very valuable amount of data that they can leverage, not only to create get more revenue, but the first thing they need to do is create value for their customers, and then the revenue comes automatically. So helping that data to provide better advisory, so that's in the benefit of their customers, and whether that is a retail consumer or it's a large corporate where you use the data to manage their risks, their global risk, country risk, counterparty risk, currency risk, whatever kind of risk, commodity risk, which is at the moment, of course, very, very relevant with the volatility in commodities. I think that banks can play a very essential role with our expertise of the international markets and using the data to provide, in this case, corporates, very specific advisory in those areas, especially those risk areas that are tailored towards that specific organization.
Yeah.
And I expect a lot in that space for the coming years. Absolutely.
Yeah, I was at a session by KPMG, and they basically predicted there were three big investment areas: ESG, market infrastructures, and payment technology.
Yeah.
Well, then we're well set as Icon, I would say. But was there any specific session or talk that you really liked, Arjeh, during Sibos?
Well, the same of Kuipers.
That was nice. Yeah.
That was nice. Also because it's something out of the payment space. So it's good to hear a presentation from a completely different area, but making the links to your own industry, and that's I think that was one of the top presentations, or where I learned most of it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I also really like the closing speech on that same stage, which was the InnoTribe stage of Swift, where we had 5 speakers from different backgrounds. So an anthropologist, a scientist, a trend watcher, David Birch, a banker, and really a tech specialist on what if banking was the climate, or what if banking was the metaverse, a quantum computer, a colony of ants, and the last one, the next space frontier. And I think that really nicely captures the type of themes and the way of thinking that we've seen at Sibos. So I really liked that session as well. It was very diverse, but also completely different perspective on what banking can do and maybe should not do going forward. So that's also good. So I think in essence, we see great opportunity for banks, particularly in the payment space, which is still very hot and happening. So if you have any questions on how you can change and transform your payment technology, if you are interested to learn more about our greenhouse strategy, IPF as a product, or digital transformation in this space in general, please reach out to us anytime.